March 11th, 2011, 2:46 in the afternoon. In Japan, that was just a normal Friday. Kids were in school. Salarymen were at their desks. Old fishermen were pulling in their last nets before heading home. Nobody, not a single person in the entire country, knew what was about to happen. And then, the ground moved. Not a little. Not like a tremor you feel and forget. The entire island of Japan shifted 2.4 meters to the east. In 6 minutes, Japan was no longer in the same place it had been 6 minutes ago.
2 Australians are still unaccounted for after the Japanese earthquake and tsunami.
Okay, well, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck off Japan's northeastern coast.
What followed was not one disaster. It was 3 disasters, stacked on top of each other, inside a single week. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake, the biggest Japan had ever recorded. Then a tsunami, with waves that reached 40 meters high, the height of a 13-story building. And then, something that scientists had nightmares about, something governments had wargamed in secret briefings, a nuclear meltdown, not one reactor. 3. Japan's prime minister would later say that without one man's decision to break a direct order from headquarters, 50 million people would have had to leave Tokyo permanently.
This is from our camera reporter in Miyagi. And it looks like the tsunami has engulfed several cities in Miyagi Prefecture.
2:46 and 24 seconds. Under the Pacific Ocean floor, about 70 kilometers off the Oshika Peninsula, 2 tectonic plates had been locked together for centuries. The Pacific Plate had been grinding beneath Japan for millions of years, building pressure the way you bend a ruler further and further until it snaps. On March 11th, the seafloor slipped 50 meters in an instant. 50 meters. The rupture tore across a 400-kilometer fault line, and the energy it released was almost impossible to describe in human terms. It was equal to 9,000 Hiroshima bombs, detonated simultaneously. Buildings swayed for 6 minutes. 6 endless minutes. And for the first time in Japan's recorded history, the country's earthquake early warning system had less than 8 seconds to react. 8 seconds. Shinkansen bullet trains automatically braked. Factories cut power. School children dove under their desks. When the shaking finally stopped, most people exhaled. They had survived. They thought the worst was over. It had barely begun. 3 minutes after the earthquake, the Japan Meteorological Agency issued a tsunami warning. Their estimate, waves up to 6 meters. 6 meters is terrifying. 6 meters kills people. But 6 meters was not what was coming. Deep in the Pacific, a GPS buoy began transmitting readings that made scientists stare at their screens and go quiet. The ocean was not rising at 6 meters. It was rising at 40. By the time the upgraded warning went out, the wave was already at the shore. In 1518, Ofunato. The sea gauge hit 8 meters, and then the gauge was destroyed. 1526, Miyako City. A 13-story wall of black water appeared at the harbor entrance. Japan had built seawalls for exactly this moment. Taro City had a wall they called the Great Wall of Japan, 10 meters high, 2.4 kilometers long. Built after the 1933 tsunami killed 911 people. The wave went over it by 7 meters. The deepest ocean breakwater in the world, at Kamaishi Bay, had cost $1.5 billion and taken 30 years to build. The tsunami tore it apart like paper. In the town of Aniyoshi, the wave reached 40.5 meters above sea level, the highest tsunami ever recorded in Japan, higher than the Statue of Liberty from ground to torch. In 28 minutes, 561 square kilometers of Japan's coastline was underwater. Entire towns, gone. Not damaged, not flooded, gone. Replaced by silence, debris, and the smell of salt and diesel. In the town of Minami Sanriku, a 24-year-old woman named Miki Endo sat at her emergency broadcast desk on the second floor of the disaster management building. She had been married just 7 months earlier. Her job that afternoon was to broadcast tsunami warnings through the town loudspeakers. As the water began rushing toward the building, her colleagues ran to the roof. Miki Endo stayed at her desk. Her voice kept broadcasting. The building was 3 stories tall, and the wave was higher. Of roughly 40 colleagues who made it to the roof, 11 survived. Miki Endo's body was recovered 6 weeks later. A survivor, Taiza Haga, later told her mother, "I heard your daughter's voice the whole way." Okawa Elementary School sat near the Kitakami River, in a town that many parents had chosen specifically because it was inland, away from the coast. They thought it was safe. On the afternoon of March 11th, 78 children were present. After the earthquake, teachers gathered everyone in the yard and debated what to do. Directly behind the school was a hill, a 3-minute walk, high enough. They did not go to the hill. For nearly 50 minutes, they waited in the schoolyard. At 3:37 p.m., the teachers began leading the children toward a nearby levee. They were walking toward the river. The tsunami came up the river. 74 children died that afternoon. 10 of the 11 teachers died. 1 teacher survived. 4 children survived. An 11-year-old boy named Tetsuya Tadano survived by riding a floating refrigerator. His mother had died. His sister had died. He was found standing on debris, alone, in the dark. He was 11 years old. While Japan was still counting its dead from the tsunami, something was happening 180 kilometers south that the world didn't know about yet. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant had survived the earthquake. Its 3 operating reactors had shut down automatically, exactly as designed. Emergency diesel generators were cooling the cores. Everything was under control. Then the second tsunami wave hit. At 3:35 p.m., 13.1 meters. The plant's seawall was 5.7 meters. In seconds, salt water flooded the turbine halls, the generator rooms, the basements. 12 of 13 emergency generators drowned. The cooling stopped. The temperature in the reactors began to climb, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. In the basement of Unit 4, 2 young workers were checking valves when the wave hit. Kazuhiko Kakubo was 24. Yoshiki Terashima was 21. Their bodies were found 19 days later. At 7:03 p.m., Prime Minister Naoto Kan declared a nuclear emergency. 18,000 people were ordered to evacuate. By morning, the evacuation zone was 12 miles wide and growing. His name was Masao Yoshida. He was the plant superintendent. 6 feet tall, chain-smoking, Tokyo-educated nuclear engineer. For 4 days after the earthquake, Yoshida ran the entire disaster response from an emergency room inside the plant. No sleep, sporadic food, radiation climbing, 3 reactors heading toward meltdown simultaneously. On the evening of March 12th, Yoshida began pumping seawater into the damaged Unit 1 reactor to cool it. TEPCO headquarters in Tokyo, watching the same feed, ordered him to stop. Yoshida pulled his foreman aside, lowered his voice, and said, "During the teleconference, I'll tell you to stop. But you don't need to follow the order. Keep pumping water. Got it?" He lied to headquarters. While they watched on the teleconference screen, he kept the water running. Japan's Nuclear Accident Commission later concluded that his defiance was possibly the only reason the reactor cores didn't fully explode. Masao Yoshida stayed at the plant for a month. He was diagnosed with esophageal cancer 8 months later. He died on July 9, 2013. He was 58 years old. He never gave a single press conference. He never wrote a book. Most of the world has never heard his name. On March 25th, the chairman of Japan's Atomic Energy Commission was asked to prepare a worst-case scenario. The report was classified. It said that if Unit 4's spent fuel pool lost its water and ignited, Japan would need to evacuate everyone within 170 kilometers of the plant, including Tokyo, 50 million people. Prime Minister Kan later said he read the report and thought Japan itself might cease to exist as a functioning state. The pool didn't ignite. Not because of brilliant engineering, not because of government planning, but because a refueling delay from the week before the disaster had left extra water sitting in an adjacent reactor well, which slowly leaked into the pool and kept the fuel just barely covered. Japan was saved by an accident of timing. 1 week earlier, the pool would have been dry. The tsunami did not stop at Japan. It raced across the Pacific at 720 kilometers per hour, faster than a commercial jet. 7 hours after the earthquake, Hawaii took its first hit. Alaska, California, Oregon, Chile. In Crescent City, California, surges destroyed the harbor and caused $50 million in damage. The only American who died was 25-year-old Dustin Weber, who walked to the beach after hearing the first wave had passed and was swept away by the second. 18 hours after the earthquake, the wave reached Antarctica. It is a swell of just 30 centimeters, small at that distance, barely noticeable. But that swell struck the Sulzberger ice shelf and broke off 125 square kilometers of ancient ice. The first time a tsunami had ever been directly observed calving a polar ice shelf, a wave from Japan, breaking ice at the bottom of the world. Katsutaro Hamada, 79, of Rikuzentakata, got his wife to safety as the tsunami sirens blared. Then he ran back to his house, back toward the water, to get the photo album of his grandchildren, Sayori and Hikari. Rescuers found him later in a first-floor bathroom. The album was pressed against his chest. His son, Hironobu, told the press, "He really loved the grandchildren, but it was stupid. He has no pictures of me." He paused. "But I understand. Of course I understand." When the last tallies were confirmed, 19,782 people were dead. 2,550 were never found. Over 120,000 homes destroyed. 470,000 people displaced at the peak. The total damage, $235 billion, making it the most expensive natural disaster in human history. The Fukushima decommissioning alone is expected to cost over $300 billion and may not be finished until the year 2051. As of today, roughly 30,000 people from Fukushima still cannot go home. Wild boars with radiation levels hundreds of times the safe limit roam the empty streets of their old neighborhoods. Japan shut down every single nuclear reactor in the country. All 54. The last village to be reopened was Futaba in 2022, 11 years later. Of 7,200 residents who once lived there, 190 came back. In the village of Aniyoshi, on the Sanriku coast, there is a stone marker. It was placed there after the 1933 tsunami. Carved into it are these words: "High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point." The people of Aniyoshi listened. Their village stood above the marker. In 2011, the waves stopped just below the stone. Not a single person in Aniyoshi died. A kilometer away, in towns where the warnings had been forgotten, or ignored, or overruled by development committees decades later, everything was gone. There is a phone booth on a hill in the town of Otsuchi. The phone is disconnected. It's an old rotary phone in a white glass booth. A man named Itaru Sasaki built it in 2010 to talk to a cousin who had died of cancer. He called it the wind phone. After the tsunami took 1,400 people from his town, he opened it to anyone. Over 35,000 people have climbed that hill to pick up the receiver. To speak to someone they will never speak to again. They talk about what they had for breakfast, about the weather, about how the fishing was, about how much they miss them. Sasaki said he built it because his thoughts couldn't travel through a regular phone line. He wanted them to be carried on the wind. March 11th, 2011 did not end Japan, but it left a mark that no reconstruction can erase. In the rubble of 120,000 destroyed homes, in the empty streets of towns that no one has returned to, in a phone booth on a hill, where the line is always busy.